Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our event on building a data-driven culture with connected sheets in Looker. My name is Lauren, and I'm the content manager for the Google Cloud community. Joining us today are Mer and Sneha, who will be leading the session at content and answering your questions. Questions are encouraged, so please feel free to add those into the YouTube chat box, and we'll be sure to get to them in the chat or at the end of the presentation. We also have a few pre-submitted questions that we'll cover as well. And for any questions that we don't get to, please share them in the Google Cloud community, and someone from the community or the Looker team or the Google Sheets team will be happy to help you out. And there are links to the community in the YouTube description. All right, with that, I will hand it over to the team to take us through the session today.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lauren. And hi, everyone. Welcome to this community event. And thank you so much for coming. I'm really glad you're all here. My name is Mer Newton, and I am an outbound product manager for the Looker platform. I've been working with Looker for about the last 7 years, and I'm really thrilled today to share more about the Connected Sheets for Looker feature. It's probably been one of the most exciting features that I've worked on, and a big part of that has been my fantastic partnership with the Connected Sheets product manager, Sneha. So I'll let her introduce herself and get us kicked off.
Thank you, Mer. So hi, everyone. I'm Sneha. I'm a product manager on Sheets. So I've been on Connected Sheets for almost a year now. Been working really closely with Mer and her team. Connected Sheets for Looker has been generally available for since early this year. And so Mer and I have a lot of features to tell you about, some of which are already in the product, but some are coming in the next year or so. So we are super excited to chat with y'all. With that, let's dive in. Today, we're going to tell you about Connected Sheets. We're going to cover how you or anyone in your organization can generate data insights from Google Sheets. I'll show you a bit about how Connected Sheets works in general with millions of rows of data, specifically with BigQuery. But then Mer will tell you a little bit more about how you can connect from Sheets directly to Looker, Google Cloud's modern business intelligence platform. So what is Connected Sheets and why should you be interested? With this amazing turnout today, you can see that companies are still looking for ways to turn data into intelligent and actionable insights. A recent survey said that 61% of companies invest in data-driven initiatives as a top priority. However, you still need specialized skills like SQL to get these insights. What we see is that analysts at companies are frequently overwhelmed with the demand of working with complex, fragmented systems at scale. There's usually a queue of requests pending for a given analyst, and each one can take weeks to fulfill. Sometimes they're even as simple as which region has the most sales in a given quarter. In some cases, waiting a few weeks means you miss out on the opportunity to sign a new deal. And a lot of times, analysts extract data, maybe put it in a spreadsheet, and then hand it off to marketing or sales where they create pivot tables and charts. So with Connected Sheets, everyone in your organization can deliver value with data without any specialized analytical skills. Our goal is to reduce the time and complexity to data insights at scale. So how do we do that? Like I said before, with Connected Sheets, you can basically write a complex SQL query that analyzes billions of rows of data without any SQL. So you're getting the best of both worlds. You're getting the shareability and accessibility of Sheets with the real-time scale of your datasets. Users can extract data from BigQuery or Looker to understand trends for quick decision-making. Take, for instance, a data set about product revenue, and Mer will use this example later too. A user can create pivot tables and charts, for example, for gross revenue per quarter. They can use Sheets' built-in column insights to find the minimum, maximum, and average expenses per quarter. Further, they can use handy filter by value or group operations to have even more targeted reports, say for products sold in North America. Users can then forecast their revenue for future quarters by using formulas and calculated columns in sheets. They can also join in other data sets or forecasts ad hoc using built-in sheets functions like VLOOKUP and everything else. Users can then go on to build insights together with their teams using workspace collaboration tools. For instance, they can comment on their team's work or even see edit history for a given cell in a sheet when you have multiple collaborators. After all this analysis, they can then chart their results and then reuse those charts for reviews with their managers, in something like slides. A month later, they can come back into that sheet, refresh the data with one click, and see updated revenue forecasts for their products in North America. With connected sheets, everyone in your organization is using a single source of truth, since Sheets creates a live connection to your data. Every pivot table, every chart, and every extract is pulling directly from your underlying data source. In this case, it's BigQuery or Looker. We even allow users to set up automatic refreshes on your reports so your data is always up to date. You'll see demos about this multiple times in this presentation. So now that we've talked a little bit about how you do analysis in connected sheets, let's talk about how Workspace thinks about collaboration and security. When you create a pivot table as part of your analysis in connected sheets, you're now in Workspace world. So you're using Workspace's secure collaboration model on your data set. So what does that mean? So our goal is to ensure that employees can stay productive wherever they are on whatever device type, be it iOS, Mac, Windows, if the device is corp issued or third party. Workspace also focuses on keeping sensitive data where it should stay rather than floating around in attachments or third-party storage applications. How many times have you pulled up email to try and find that one analysis someone sent you like 3 months ago? We offer comprehensive data protections like the ability to control data access and protect against data loss. And you can also create data governance policies and set up flexible access management to apps. Additionally, on connected sheets, you can use Workspace logs to see who has queried your data source, when, whether it was a manual or scheduled fetch. Finally, we know that IT admins work really hard to avoid disrupting their end users' productivity, but often policy changes require training end users and motivating them to adopt safe and secure behaviors. With our end user nudges, we make it easier for users to do the right thing. So now that with all that introduction, let's talk about connected sheets for BigQuery. I want to remind y'all that this is available for you to use today on Sheets. You do not have to sign up for anything. You can use it today. So BigQuery can run billions of complex queries per second, and your organization can then react to any event real time and analyze petabytes of data as part of that reaction. On the other hand, Sheets allows you to make data-driven decisions and insights with all the your favorite tools we just talked about: pivot tables, charts, formulas, suggestions. All of this makes analysis really accessible to people in your organization. So if you put them together with connected sheets for BigQuery, you get the familiarity of your favorite spreadsheet actions with the real-time scale of BigQuery. Let's see a quick demo of what this looks like. To start off, you choose your cloud project, select a data set, and choose the table or view you want to connect to. Now your BigQuery data is in Sheets. You can see a detailed preview, including column level insights to find average, min, or max. You can analyze your data in a pivot table that queries millions of rows of data from BigQuery. And finally, to keep this report up to date, you set up a scheduled refresh to automatically query the underlying data. Mary is going to go into way more detail. This was a super high-level demo of this. But to reiterate, you can try this out for free today with Sheets. That said, Mary, do you want to tell us more about how we can use Looker with connected Sheets?
Absolutely. And I'll also take just a quick moment. I think a number of you are asking questions through the chat, so thank you for that. We have Greg Michnikov, who's one of our other fantastic Looker PMs, who's addressing a number of those questions. So you're probably seeing his name pop up in the chat. Keep sending the questions over. We're excited to get to the Q&A portion at the end of this, and Greg will be addressing a number of those questions in the meantime. But to jump into connected sheets with Looker. So Sneha just talked about connected sheets with BigQuery, which is so powerful when it comes to making big data analytics accessible to really all types of spreadsheet users. But sometimes connecting to that underlying raw data, it isn't always going to be enough. Basic aggregations like summing up a revenue column or counting an order ID column are pretty straightforward, but a lot of times you might run into more complex metrics that you need, things like customer lifetime value, inventory on hand, and these can be a lot more difficult to configure within a pivot table, even with all of the calculations and formulas that you have available through Sheets. And this is where Looker really comes in. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Looker, Looker is a BI and analytics platform that supports over 50 different SQL dialects and runs queries right within your database. It has a version-controlled semantic layer that can really act as a centralized single source of truth for defining your business metrics and data relationships. So by using connected sheets and Looker together, what you're able to do is really bring modeled multi-cloud data from Looker right into the Google Sheets spreadsheet interface. So just another quick little something about Looker. Looker's magic sauce is really in its semantic modeling capabilities. Looker's semantic modeling is built using LookML, which is abstracted SQL. LookML takes really the versatility of the SQL language and makes it just a little bit better by incorporating reusability, collaboration, and version control. So Looker as a product knows how to write SQL. When you're writing LookML, you aren't writing general SQL. You're basically telling Looker how it should write SQL against your data specifically. And then by coding that information into Looker's semantic layer, you enable all types of users to ask questions of the data without dealing with all of the technical complexities behind it or the data architecture and infrastructure. For users who are then working in Google Sheets with that live connection to Looker, this means that updates to a pivot table in Sheets result in a query that gets sent to Looker, which in turn is run by Looker in your data warehouse using that logic that's built into the semantic layer. So this means no extracts, no stale data, since you're running those new queries against your data source directly, and it includes any updated information in those results. Looker also stores metadata information. I know there's a lot of questions around things like security and auditing. So Looker stores metadata around all of those queries that get run, and it exposes it through internal Looker reporting called system activity. And that can be used by admins to really monitor and audit both usage and performance of what's happening with the queries that are executed. So connected sheets and Looker can each be used separately, of course, but using the two together does bring some important benefits. So the first big one is that It enables you to analyze data from any of the 50 plus data sources that Looker connects to, so you can really reach beyond BigQuery. And users wouldn't just be connecting to raw data, you're connecting and running live queries based on the model that's built in Looker and able to access multiple tables at once through the join logic that's in Looker's semantic layer. The second key piece here is that you can analyze and make data-driven decisions without learning a new tool. Even though Looker does have its own UI for visualization and data exploration, it is a new tool for most people, and we recognize that. And new tools take time and a willingness to learn. So this connectivity really brings the goodness of Looker's semantic layer, the defined fields and metrics and join relationships, into that familiar spreadsheet interface with pivot tables and charts and formulas that a lot of people are already using and understand. And then the third big benefit is really that spreadsheets are still the primary BI tool in most organizations and that most people use. Visualizations are great and they provide a lot of insight, but at the end of the day, we continue to find that many people, they like to see the numbers, they like to drill in and see the key drivers behind the metrics that are exposed, and bringing that modeled governed data from Looker into Sheets enables people to really work the way that they want to, which is hands-on with the numbers in that agile, flexible way that you get with a spreadsheet. So you can do more with your Looker data by not only accessing it, but starting to combine it then in Sheets with other local data sets for an even richer ad hoc analysis experience. So let's take a closer look at exactly how this works. I've put together a few short video demonstrations to kind of walk through everything from the connection and actually working with that model in a pivot table up through scheduling a refresh, which Sneha already touched on, and sharing this with other users. So we'll start with the connection experience. Connecting to Looker data is pretty quick and simple. From the data menu, you can see here, there's just that data connectors in the dropdown, and you can choose Looker, put in your instance URL or select a recent instance. And then you're just choosing your Looker model and the Looker Explorer that you want to connect to. And a Looker Explorer, just for context, is really an object in Looker that contains all of your join relationships. So you'll see here that by connecting to an Explorer, we're actually accessing 3 different tables all at once. We have order data, product data, and user data. And then I can start to work with this data set by creating my pivot table and analyzing the data just like I would in any other pivot table. So bringing in a measure like revenue as my value, adding different dimensions as columns so that I can slice and dice that value across different categories. In this case, looking at product categories specifically. And now I'm able to see very quickly product category revenue for each. And that's bringing together data from both my product table and my order transactions table behind the scenes. So all of the fields that you see available in that pivot table, they're all defined within the Looker semantic model. And defining those centrally really makes it easy to incorporate that more complex logic that I mentioned at the beginning. So I'll click play on this one. And let's consider for a moment a common metric like revenue. It seems pretty straightforward, but what if orders that were returned in this case were actually being counted towards revenue? And what if a user didn't realize that a filter needed to be applied? This could really result in reports that include overstated revenue numbers. But in the example here, you can see that there's no revenue associated with returned orders. And this is because the revenue metric is defined centrally, and all of the appropriate logic and filters are already applied. So you don't need to apply blanket filters that impact your entire data set. And instead, you can actually bring in a measure like revenue and then start to slice it and dice it in different ways without worrying about that underlying definition. And then the other bonus is that if the definition of revenue changes, perhaps within Looker, maybe we're also removing promotions or promotional discounts from it in some way, then that new definition gets picked up automatically the next time the data is refreshed in your sheet. So we've talked about that central model. And while Looker brings that centralized model into Google Sheets brings that very familiar spreadsheet user experience. And to further enhance this, we have some new features coming later this year that will enable users to do even more through the Looker and Sheets connectivity. First, we have support for filter expressions, and this allows you to apply relative date filters like the last 3 days or this year in the example on top of any date or time dimension that you're working with. The second is a new filter by measure that we have coming, which enables measure filters to be used within your pivot tables that are connected to a Looker model. So here we're filtering our cells to only include orders where the count is greater than 100. And then the third new option that I think a question already came in about from Steph, if I'm not mistaken, is a new filter by value option, which provides you with a list of filter options queried straight from the data source. So in this example, I had used the status field. I could see all of the order statuses that were available and then easily filter just to completed orders. So this is in flight and will hopefully be available within the next few months for you to start using as well. And then of course, on top of all of this, you have the ability to add context like conditional formatting to your pivot table with those flexible rules for defining your formatting based on your data. And then you can layer in different calculations and other types of features and leverage Sheets auto completion to get insights even faster from your data. And then not only can you hit that apply button to refresh the data as you work, but you can also set up schedules to keep your reports fresh over time. So I'll show you what that looks like here. To set up a schedule, you would just go into your refresh options within the edit menu of your pivot table. And then you set the cadence in which your report should be updated. So you can choose time increments of hourly, daily, weekly, or even monthly. Choose the time frame where the refresh should occur, and then choose the start date for the schedule. And this is exactly the same for Looker as it would be for a sheet connected to BigQuery. So Sneh had touched on that earlier as well, and both would work the same way. And then the last thing, you can of course share your data or your report with anyone else who might need it using standard Sheets collaboration capability. So just note that for data coming in from a Looker model, and I saw some questions around this as well, users will only be able to refresh the data if they have the right data access and permissions within Looker. A lot of that user access and permissioning is governed within the Looker model to ensure security of that data. Okay, so I touched on these already, but I wanted to again just really quickly highlight 3 new features that are coming to the Sheets integration with Looker over the next several months. The one that I think you'll be likely to see first is filtering on measures within a pivot table. So that's something like, order count is greater than 100. That was in the demo video. The next is support for Looker filter expressions, which is particularly valuable for applying relative filters to time, like this year or last 30 days within your pivot table. And basically, filter expressions that work directly in Looker would work through your Sheets connection as well. And then finally, filtering by value, which gives you that pick list coming right from the database so that you can select or deselect different options whenever you're applying a new filter. And really, by continuing to bring these types of new features to the Looker integration with connected sheets, we're trying to make it as easy as possible to do your flexible analytics on top of that model data, so that data access and analysis capabilities can be further democratized across all user types, which is really what helps move you towards that sort of data-driven culture. So let's take a really quick look at just a couple of customer use cases before we jump into the Q&A. Keep those questions coming. The first customer use case that I wanted to share is Carbon Health. Carbon Health's mission is to really make high quality healthcare more accessible to everyone. They started using Looker alone, and when they heard about the private preview for the connected sheets for Looker integration, they immediately jumped on board and became an early adopter. And what this feature did for them is it gave them the ability to reach Carbon Health employees who work in Google Sheets, which, as they noted, was pretty much everybody, a super familiar tool that they could use for working with Looker data. One of the first outputs that they had from this integration was a daily and weekly performance push report that went out to clinics, specifically their operating leaders, and included providers as well. And it was essentially a scorecard, and it tracked the most important KPIs for measuring the clinic's successes. That included things like appointment volumes, patient satisfaction, clinic reviews, phone call answer rates, and even metrics about billing and collections. And to provide easy access to all of this, they built a workflow using Google Apps Script that took their daily performance report and then automatically emailed a PDF to key clinic leaders every single morning in a format that they could easily understand and digest. Within the first 30 days of the creation of that report, clinic leaders were actually able to drive noticeable improvements in their operating results. So just as an example, they started actively tracking clinic volume, and that enabled the clinics to start managing their schedules more effectively, which in turn drove more visits and enabled them to better communicate expectations with their patients. Some other clinics focused on tracking inbound call volume, and as a result, were able to dramatically improve their call answer rates, which then led to better patient satisfaction. So these larger operational efficiencies that the Carbon Health team was able to achieve were largely the result of just providing more transparency and visibility into these types of shared metrics. And the combination of Looker and connected sheets really helped them do that. So I'll quickly hand it back over to Sneha to share what AirAsia was able to do with connected sheets and BigQuery.
Thank you, Mayor. So AirAsia used connected sheets during the pandemic to rapidly forecast their business, how their business was changing, and how they can actually change their business model to be dynamic with it. So during the pandemic, AirAsia expanded their big rewards across 300 additional partners that provide shopping, food, and other products because of the slowdown in travel at that point. So what they did is they used connected sheets with BigQuery to forecast how people were using the shopping and food rewards and figure out how they can quickly change their offerings and actually grow their business. They worked with a partner to convert their models to sheets. They created data marts in BigQuery, and they created efficient UIs and UX in Sheets and other dashboards so that their finance teams could clearly see the trends in usage. They were using everyone's favorite Sheets functions, the pivot tables, charts, formulas, all of that fun stuff. And then finally, they used an AppScript application to save these outcomes back in BigQuery. So with connected Sheets, their team members could work through thousands of rows of data. And they were looking at data like the number of transactions made, the points that were issued per member, the points redemptions that were taking place, and at what rate. So what was the impact of all of this? They could reduce their budgeting time from 3 months to 2 to 3 weeks. And they empowered even more team members to rapidly create reports that they could use for decision making, which is our goal here with Connected Sheets. So hopefully those two use cases give you an idea of how Connected Sheets could work in your organization. And I think with that, we're ready for some questions.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for the presentation, the information, and some of those walkthrough demos. And thank you everyone for joining us, as well as Greg for answering so many of these questions in the chat. We appreciate it, and keep them coming. We're going to get to your questions in just a moment. But before then, I wanted to share a few additional resources for you to highlight. So first is that first link, the Looker community. We would love to have you join, learn, and engage with us, each other, and the Looker team members in the community if you're not already a member. So you can use that link at the top to check it out. And it's also in the YouTube description as a quick reference. That second link is our feedback forum. I'll drop it into the chat, but we would love to hear your feedback about this session or ideas for future topics or sessions that you'd like to hear more about. So it'll only take you a minute or so just to fill out that form. So we'd love to hear from you there. And as I said, I'll drop it into the chat in just a moment. And then lastly, we did want to share just upcoming events that we have. So we have a few coming up next week around the workspace, app sheet, and cloud, talking AI and all things data analytics. So feel free to check out that link there at the bottom, and you can see everything that we have coming up. Okay, we do have a lot of questions, so we are going to cover some of the pre-submitted questions, which we hope will address some of the common questions from all of you as well. So let's dive in. Around real-time or automatic data updates and syncs. How to have a Looker report refresh in a Google Sheet automatically without me having to manually update or refresh the data. And then as a second part to this question is, can data run both ways between Sheets and Looker? So if the data is updated in Sheets, these are reflected in Looker and vice versa. We'd like to know the functionalities going both ways.
Yes, I can jump in and take this one. So scheduled refresh, we covered as part of the demonstration, and that allows you to set up a data refresh schedule so that you can create those kind of automated refreshes without having to go in and do it manually. So take a look at that. That's available now, and something that you could start using today with either your BigQuery data or your Looker data. In terms of the integration, kind of Looker to Sheets versus Sheets to Looker, this is very much focused on the Looker model being exposed and accessed through Sheets. This isn't about taking Sheets data and then piping it back into Looker. If you really needed to do something like that, I'm sure you could set up a workflow to bring Sheets data into BigQuery, and then Looker could access it from there. But Looker is very much a SQL engine. It's going to work on top of SQL data sources and is focused more on creating that governed data model. So there isn't a pathway right now for bringing Sheets data directly into Looker and into your model.
Makes sense. Awesome. All right. Our next question is around security and compliance. And I think we saw a couple of questions around this topic in the chat as well. How to handle security concerns associated with having a direct connection to the data warehouse. Please elaborate on the steps taken to ensure proper privacy protections are put in place. And then again, as a follow-up here is, what are best practices with allowing end users to do analysis on data in a way that's compliant or anonymizes PII or PHI?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in here as well. I think some of these are a little bit broad in terms of questions, so I want to break it down into 3 different components when we talk about security. And I think some of these will apply specifically to Looker, some of them will apply to Sheets, and some will apply to both. But the 3 different components are database security, product security, and content security. So from a database perspective, there's a lot of recommendations out there for keeping your database secure. For Looker in particular, we recommend only enabling Looker to have sort of the smallest number of permissions required to perform the functions that it needs. And there's a ton of Looker documentation out there that gives some of those recommendations and tips to ensure that your database is as secure as possible. Adding Looker IPs to an allow list, encrypting your SSL transmissions, using an SSH tunnel for your connection. So a lot of options around there. For some databases, you can also use OAuth for database connectivity. And what that means is that your users are required to log into Google in order to issue queries against the database. So BigQuery is a great example of this. And then when queries are run, they're actually run as that user and retain the access and permissions that are granted to that user inside of BigQuery. So that's really your database security. From a product perspective, so for Looker specifically, we recommend using user authentication that includes like 2-factor authentication or some sort of identity provider, Google OAuth, SAML, LDAP. And then within Looker, you can also define specific user permissions, data and model access, and even row level access within Looker. And all of that is respected in Sheets whenever someone is making a connection from Sheets to Looker. Their permissions are taken into account in terms of what they're able to do, and their data access is taken into account in relation to what they're able to actually access. And then on the content side, for Sheets specifically, I think I'll punt this one back to Sneha to talk a little bit more about the specific Sheets security.
So when you create a connected sheet and have a pivot table with Looker data in Sheets, you are now in workspace security and compliance land. So we had a slide where we covered how we think about compliance and the tools you have available to you there. I want to highlight, because this is connected sheet specific again, even though I already said it, when someone runs a query to Looker in Drive and other Looker logs, you can see who ran the query. You can see when they ran it. You can see which data set they hit and they used, and you can see whether it was a manual or a scheduled refresh. So you can get a sense of how the data is being used, how data is being used throughout your organization. And then if you combine that with other workspace logs, you can also see who else has access to that sheet and what's going on over there as well. Usual sharing conventions, everything applies over there. If you have more questions about this, I encourage you to talk to your partners or any of your CSMs and so on, and I'm sure they could also help you out.
Perfect. Thank you both. Okay, I think we just have a couple more, and then we'll be sure to get to those in the chat. Around governance, single source of truth, and managing multiple sheets. So how are connected sheets governed to ensure a single source of truth, how to maintain all the sheets that get created across the org that a central data team may not know about? And then lastly, how would you relate data across multiple spreadsheets using connected sheets and Looker?
I can get started, and then Mare, feel free to jump in if you want to add anything else as well. So we talked a little bit about this during the presentation, but essentially when you create a pivot table in Sheets using Looker data, it directly queries the underlying data source. So what that means is that whenever you refresh that pivot table, it will re-pull data. And you can, and like Mare showed you in that very detailed example, you can even set up a schedule refresh so that you don't ever have to think about keeping your data fresh. This is especially useful if your definitions change, say of revenue, because you can actually, that data will automatically be pulled into any sheet that is using that definition. I think that kind of addresses the how would you relate data across multiple spreadsheets as well, because essentially everything is a pipe to Looker. And when the underlying data source changes, every other spreadsheet is ready for that change and can receive that change as well. Mary, did you want to add anything else?
I was just going to say, I think that would apply for BigQuery as well, right? So BigQuery under the hood, any sheets that are connected to the same BigQuery table, if something changes in the back end, that's all going to be synced up directly, and you're going to be pulling that live data. The only other thing I'll note is that you can also connect to more than one data set within a Google Sheets file. Each connection would basically show up as a different tab inside the file, and you can then create multiple pivot tables. If you need to start relating data across pivot tables, you can use Sheets formulas like VLOOKUPs that we all love to try to bring those data points together in a new report. So that's absolutely possible if you're trying to bring different things together.
Yeah, and then you can set up a refresh that actually updates all those tables every week, instead of thinking about what's going on with each table. So that way, you know, when you log in Monday at 9 a.m., you already refreshed it at Monday at 8 a.m.
Lauren, I think you're muted.
You're muted, yeah.
Thanks. All right, regarding access and permissions, in which pricing plans is Connected Sheets included, and what permissions or roles are required in order to enable it or to start using it?
I love answering this question. Connected Sheets is available to all users of Sheets. You can use it today. We even have a free trial with BigQuery, so you could literally get started today using Connected Sheets with a demo data set or any data you already have in BigQuery. I think Mare talked a bit about Looker and what permissions and roles are set up over there. Did you want to add anything else there?
Yeah, for Looker permissions, and I'm seeing some questions in the chat around this as well. So you need to have a Looker hosted instance. And then when a user is connecting to Looker through Sheets and running a query from Sheets, their Looker access and permissions apply, which I had mentioned. So when you're creating a new connection or building a pivot table in Sheets, that's very similar to kind of that explore functionality in Looker, and a user would need the explore permission to be able to see that list of explores and actually use the data in a pivot table like they would in a Looker Explorer. But I believe that if a user just has view permissions, they could still refresh the data because a viewer user in Looker can run queries. They just can't create new queries. So the way that the permissions come through in Sheets, it's actually very similar to how they work in Looker. If you have the Explore permission, you can build new. If you have the view permission, then you can view and refresh, but you wouldn't be able to build new.
There's a little bit of a nuance on BigQuery too. So now that Mare talked about the Looker nuances, so on the BigQuery side, and also generally in Connected Sheets, we have tiered pricing plans within Workspace for it. What you get at the higher tier is more advanced security in terms of logging and access to delegated access within BigQuery. So what that basically means is beyond the usual BigQuery permissions that would apply in a similar way that that Mare described Looker permissions would apply, within a sheet you could delegate access to a given user. So if I share a sheet with Mare with edit access, I could say I give Mare permission to query BigQuery using my credentials. So if you look at logs now, and Mare runs a refresh on that sheet that I sent her, it will say that Mare ran a refresh on sheet 123 on dataset ABC using Sneha's credentials.
Awesome. Thank you both. All right. I think this is our last one, and then we'll dive into the chat. So considering performance, is there a limit to the data pool, and how can we overcome the limited rows or a too large of a query limitation of this integration?
I can get started. Again, as usual, Mayor, feel free to jump in. So there are two limits going on over here. And I think Greg talked about I think there might be a third limit somewhere. So feel free to add that as well. But at a high level, there are two main limits we care about. On the connected sheet side, it's around 25K rows on pivot tables. And we're looking to increase that actively right now. So in the next few months, hopefully you will see a larger size over there. On the Looker side, it's 30K rows, right, Mayor?
Yes, and I think you would need the download without limits permission to have the full 30,000 rows accessible. And that will be, I think, even more important once the sheets limitation is increased, because right now, even if you pull in 30,000, it won't necessarily all work within your pivot table. So working on increases across the board, but it's 30,000 right now for Looker with that permission of download without limit.
And then in terms of how to avoid hitting the limits within Sheets, what we have seen previously talking to customers is that a lot of times people will pull a larger data sets and then figure out how to filter it additionally with, say, North America or with last 7 days or last 30 days. So what we kind of recommend in your workflows is to dive into your analysis as soon as possible and start playing with filters. And that'll be especially easier with the 3 new filters that are coming out in the next few months, because you'll be able to more easily pick the data set you care about quickly and not run into initial data size limits in the beginning.
Excellent. Thank you both. Okay, so now we're going to dive into your chat questions. I know Greg has been answering many of these, so thank you. If we do repeat a question that's already been answered in the chat, we apologize, but hopefully we'll be able to provide any additional context and information around it. So thank you for your questions. Keep them coming. And again, for any that we don't get to in this session today, please drop them into the Looker community and we'll be sure to follow up with you. Okay, we have a question from Tim. Can I schedule a Looker in Google Sheets for sequential dates?
I'm not 100% sure what this one means, but with the schedule refresh, you can set up the cadence on an hourly, daily, weekly, or monthly basis. So if you needed your Looker data to refresh in Sheets for sequential dates, you could set up a daily refresh to achieve that. You can also turn off your scheduled refresh if then you don't need that. So say you only need it to refresh daily for the first week of the month, you could set that up, turn it off, and then turn it back on the next month. So there's different options with that scheduled refresh to accomplish what I think is being asked here.
Perfect. Yeah, and if there's any additional context or clarification around these questions, please just drop them into the chat and we'll follow up. Okay, our next one is there a way to track user engagement in Looker when users access data using connected sheets?
Yes. So there is logging of this behind the scenes. Looker has system activity. The only caveat to this is that what Looker is going to track is anything that actually results in a query or something that hits the Looker instance. And what I mean by that is that if someone refreshes the data, if someone is working in a pivot table, hitting apply, running a query, that is all going to get logged in system activity and be able to be audited and monitored and reviewed through Looker system activity. What wouldn't necessarily be tracked is if someone opens a sheet that has Looker data in it, but doesn't refresh or do anything that sends the API call or sends information over to the Looker instance. So that would then be more on the sheets side for tracking of kind of who's opening what sheets. And Sneha, did you have anything to add on that front?
That was perfect.
Great. Okay. Does a user that doesn't have Looker access, can they see or copy Looker data in Sheets?
I can.
Yes.
Oh, I can take that one.
Go
So
ahead.
yes, they can. If so, reusing the example I had before, if I created a connected sheet, created a pivot table, and I shared it with you, Lauren. If you, regardless of whether you have access to Looker, you will be able to see the data in that sheet, and you will be able to like work with it. You will not be able to refresh it or modify the query unless you have access to the Looker data set. All of this will be in workspace logs and everything else, so you can see who has access to the data set and what actions they're taking.
And
Not access to the sheet, not data set. I apologize. That was an incorrect phrase.
And the same would be true for BigQuery as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is the way we think about connected sheets generally.
Mm-hmm. And from the Looker perspective as well, it's very similar to, like, I can schedule a Looker data set or Looker report to go out to anyone, even if they don't have access to Looker. So this would be very similar in that the static view of the data can be sent out, and if needed, there might be refreshes behind that, but a user who doesn't have access wouldn't be able to actually interact with the data or refresh it on their own.
Yeah, and another analogy we use is in BigQuery, you can download data sets and then share with anyone as a CSV as well. So this follows a similar model that exists on all three systems.
Great. Appreciate it. Moving along. Will the timeout threshold for connected sheets from Looker be longer than that of webhooks?
I'm not sure what you mean by webhooks, but I can give you generally the timeout for connected sheets is around 5 minutes. For BigQuery, we hear very often that there's interest in expanding it. And that's something we're thinking about and figuring out how we can do in the future. For Looker, I haven't heard that feedback as often from customers, but we're open to hearing it, and any improvements we make would also help Looker customers as well. But I believe there are timeouts on the Looker side too, right, Mare?
Yeah, I believe that Looker will make an attempt for a maximum of 30 minutes, at least related to webhooks. Okay. And if Looker can't communicate, then with that webhook destination in 30 minutes, then the query times out. So it sounds like the timeout on the sheet side would be more of the constraint here in terms of connecting the two together.
Yeah, and that's something we are thinking about that, and you will hopefully see blogs about it sometime in the future about how we're trying to improve that.
Yeah, and then the only other thing I'll note is that because this is a query that's being executed rather than a webhook service being reached, there are settings that can be configured within your admin panel in Looker. So if you have per user query limits or specific timeouts that are set in your admin panel, that also may dictate your specific timeout parameters, and that may be different from instance to instance. So just something to keep in mind as well.
Makes sense. All right, and I see a few that are circling the same question. So curious if we're able to address this one live. When I try to connect to Looker from Sheets, after I agree to the permissions, I get this error: bad request, no enabled client found 400. Is there any insights that you can provide on this, or is this better suited for the community?
I have no idea. Sneha, any thoughts on this one?
It might be better suited for community unless Greg could answer it, because I would literally have to look it up as well.
Yep. Makes sense. All right. Please, for the folks that are asking that, drop that into the community, or we'll see if we can get back to you after looking into it. Yeah. Okay. So our next question is, will Looker support the functionality to use one tab of a Google spreadsheet as an input and generate a report output in another tab? while also allowing updates to be made to the existing tab.
Let me see if I follow this. So use one tab as the input and generate report output in another tab.
But what's the existing tab?
But what is the existing tab? So the way I'm reading this, and I may be completely wrong, but it's actually a common pattern that we see set up, where I might use a pivot table connected to Looker to effectively create the data set that I need with specific filters and kind of different slices of the data. And then in the next tab over, use VLOOKUP or cell references to effectively pull those data points into the report that I ultimately want. And this is actually something that Carbon Health did as well. So they used pivot tables to bring in the data sets that they needed from Looker. And then in that scorecard that they ultimately sent out as a PDF, they were pulling from specific data points in those pivot tables to create the metrics that were part of their KPI scorecard. And then all of it refreshed on a daily basis and went out through PDF.
Great. Okay, thank you. And I see some users are helping each other answer the previous question, so thanks. All right. If the data in Looker changes daily, data added and removed, does a connected sheet remove the data in Sheets or append and add the new data?
So it would replace the data so suppose you have a query that's what are the products in North America, basically, and then the products that are live change from Monday to Tuesday. If it refreshed on Tuesday, it would replace the data from Monday with whatever is currently in Looker or in your underlying data set for all the products that are in North America for Tuesday. So I believe it's remove, but I would prefer to use the word replace.
Yes.
Makes sense. All right. So one question we have here is there a way to use Looker Studio to join data from multiple sheets, union all kind of join?
I'm not sure. I'm not a Looker Studio expert, unfortunately. So this may be better for the community at large. I'm not aware of a union all, but in general, Looker Studio is a great tool. I know there were some questions earlier about kind of the reverse workflow of connected sheets or Google Sheets back into Looker. Looker Studio is a great option if you're trying to just bring your Sheets data in and visualize it or create a dashboard around it. But I'm less certain on the specific join capabilities available. I know when I've worked with it, it's typically the more traditional left and right joins that I'm using. I haven't seen the union all, but yeah, that might be something else to dig into in the community.
Perfect. And thank you, Greg, for following up as well. All right. I think we have time just for one or two more questions. Can you access the Looker data in Google Sheets not in a pivot table?
Not at this time. So the construct that you would utilize is a pivot table only. You can, if you want data to just be sent to Google Sheets, you can set up a schedule from Looker and basically send data into a spreadsheet and use that as a static data set for other purposes. But the specific connected sheets for Looker feature brings the data into a pivot table only.
From there, you can go in and create a chart or whatever, join it with another data set, create a formula off it. I don't know, whatever you choose to do, you can choose to do, but you have to start as of now with the pivot table as the first step.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I think we'll take this last one. On the topic of pivot tables, can I filter a pivot table of Looker data based on values in a range on a separate sheet in the Google workbook?
So for BigQuery, there is a way to, I have a two-part answer, and then Mare, feel free to jump in. On BigQuery, there is a way to do it using custom queries in BigQuery where you actually put in some SQL and then setting up your sheets to kind of like read those parameters from different places. That's something that you could find on the community, or if you have a Google associate to work with, Google contact to work with, they would know about it. For Looker, I can't think of a way to do it within the Sheets UI. However, once we support filter by parameters, eventually in Sheets, I think that would give you a way to at least be able to be more flexible with how you filter different how you filter different views. But the potential values of ranges would not be in a separate sheet. They would have to be defined in LookML. I'm going to look at you now, Mare.
Or defined somewhere. Yeah, I don't believe there isn't an option to kind of write that custom SQL back to Looker like you would have with BigQuery. I think the filter expressions can get you part of the way there because that will give you some flexibility. Those will work, I believe, not just for dates, but for other types of fields as well that accept filter expressions. So you could do something like between X and Y as a filter expression, but you within that wouldn't be able to reference your other sheet with a list of values. So you can do some of that, but again, you would be missing just that reference piece. And something that we'll certainly keep in mind, though, as we continue to iterate and build out new capability with this integration.
For sure. Yeah.
Makes good sense. All right. Thank you all so much for your time. We are just over the hour, so we do want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everyone. Mare, Sneha, just pulling up our final resources as a reference. Please feel free to utilize the community, ask any of those questions we weren't able to get to. We'll be monitoring this, and other community members will be happy to help you out as well. And then I also just dropped the link to the feedback form. So we would love to hear from you. It should just take 30 seconds to a minute. We'd love to hear from you, especially if there are any other topics that you have that you'd like to hear from in the future. All right, with that, Mare, Sneha, thank you so much for your time. I really learned a lot from preparing and delivering this session. So thank you for your time. Are there any final thoughts or notes of wisdom that you can share with everyone who's joining with us today?
I think for me, just thank you for joining. We will be trying, we have things coming that will enhance the Looker and connected sheets integration even more. And I touched on some of those today. So keep your eyes peeled on the community. We'll try to get things posted as soon as these roll out so that you know when you can start getting your hands on them yourself.
And for me, again, thank you for coming, like Mare said, and also try connected sheets today. You can go into Sheets and try it today. So you should do it.
Absolutely. I loved even seeing some folks in the chat saying they started out trying it during this session and they're getting used to some of the functionality and features from it. So great to hear that. Great to see everyone. And we would love to see you next time. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.